Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Evenings at the Conservancy. We're so grateful to have you back learning about nature and the issues facing our environment. Once again, our series sponsors back for another round this year are V at Bentley Village and Collins Vision. We are so grateful to them for renewing their support of Evenings at the Conservancy. Tonight's presentation is also sponsored by Cummings & Lockwood. I'd like to thank our former chair of the board, Ken Collier, and his partners at Cummings & Lockwood for their support of the Conservancy and its mission. We all know the challenges of climate change are already here in Southwest Florida. The real question that we're going to explore tonight is, what is it that we as individuals can do about that? We are so proud to be part of an initiative with some partners called the Growing Climate Solutions Path to Positive Southwest Florida. This initiative is founded with the Community Foundation of Collier County, the Southwest Florida Community Foundation, and our friends at Florida Gulf Coast University, with a generous startup grant from the Kapnick Family Foundation. Climate change is already impacting us here in Southwest Florida. We have already seen sea level rise. We have seen the impacts of increased intensity and frequency of hurricanes and changing patterns of rainfall, which have added to flooding and some of the challenges of how do we grow and develop while protecting our community that we all love and we enjoy living in. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Ana Puszkin-Chevlin. She is an expert in the matters of how do communities respond to the challenges and opportunities of climate change. We are so proud to have her here tonight, and I hope you enjoy tonight's presentation on climate change and what can you do to help solve the problem.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Ana Puszkin-Chevlin, the Regional Director of Growing Climate Solutions, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about climate challenges in Southwest Florida, and more importantly, the things you and I can do to confront this challenge and help us solve this problem. So as we begin tonight, I want you to think back. It's been about a year since COVID was first discovered on our shores. And during that year, our lifestyles have changed a little bit, but rather significantly. We found that many of us find ourselves working at home. About 33% of us Americans are working at home full-time, and another 25% work at home part-time. We've also been fixing up our homes. 57% of Americans have started a home improvement project since COVID pandemic started. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone started growing food in gardens. Seeds were at a shortage. In fact, Miracle-Gro found that there was a 36% increase in the number of households that were growing plants in pots and in their gardens. So why do I bring this up? Because a year later, according to a new study, we have found that these small changes in our lifestyle have resulted in a 10% decrease in greenhouse gases in the United States. If we were to stay on this path, we could possibly hit the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. But we want to be able to do this while still bringing back our economy and employing people and moving forward toward prosperity. So tonight's presentation will be a short overview of climate change impacts in Southwest Florida. What are the things that we are worried about, and what are the things we're trying to present? I'll follow this by 3 important climate drivers and the solutions we can employ: transportation, the built environment, and food systems. And finally, I'll wrap it up with some reasons why we should engage and communicate about this subject. So let's start. In Southwest Florida, we really face the threat of 4 primary impacts: sea level rise, coastal storms, changes in our precipitation, and heat waves. Sea level rise is not an eventuality, it's already happened. Since 1950, we've experienced 8 inches of sea level rise, and that rate is increasing, it's accelerating. Over the past decade, we've seen that rate go up to 1 inch every 3 years. And in the next decade, we can anticipate 9 to 15 inches of sea level rise. That's a little more than a foot. And by 2040, perhaps close to 2 feet. This is going to really impact our coastal properties. In fact, according to a recent study, some flooding will occur in coastal areas up to 26 times a year, even in the absence of a storm. And I think the property markets are now catching on to this risk. A recent study done by the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business found that prices of homes in coastal zip codes started to decline 5% relative to homes in interior, safer zip codes starting in 2018. This is a real risk, particularly in Southwest Florida, because when property values decline, so do property taxes, and those are the revenues that cities need to address climate change. In fact, Naples, Sanibel, and Fort Myers Beach were ranked 10th, 26th, and 32nd among 100 metropolitan areas in the US in terms of the property value at risk from sea level rise. Another thing we think about as all Floridians, and it shouldn't just be June 1st, are hurricanes. As temperatures get warmer, more evaporation can happen and these storms get wetter. In fact, for every 1.7 degree Fahrenheit increase in temperature, those storms become 7% wetter. We have more evaporation. And as temperatures get warmer, those storms get more intense. The number of storms that have increased from Category 3 and Category 5, instead of being 1 and 2s, will increase 5 to 6-fold for every 1 degree temperature warming in the Gulf of Mexico. If you combine stronger storms, wetter storms, and sea level rise, we know that when the storms come on shore, their storm surge is going to be higher and penetrate further inland, causing more damage. Let's look back at what has happened. In the past 16 years, Florida has experienced the direct hit of at least 9 storms and about $203 billion worth of damage. Think about the things we could have done with $233 billion. Another impact that we are starting to experience are precipitation extremes. That means when it's wet, it's going to be very wet, and during dry periods, it's going to be very dry. When it rains a lot, our streets flood, like you see in this picture on the left. And when it gets very dry, we have an increased risk of brush fires, and some of the migratory birds may not be able to find wading puddles and food when they migrate. Finally, and something that people don't address a lot, is that Southwest Florida is particularly prone to high heat index. In around 2000, the year 2000, we experienced 26 days of high heat index. Those are days where the temperature feels like over 105 degrees, combining heat and humidity. And Climate Central believes that in the next decade or so, that may increase to 135 days a year. 1/3 of the year will feel like 105 degrees. If you look on the right, you can see that Naples, Fort Myers, and Punta Gorda rank 5th, 6th, and 8th in the United States in terms of cities that will experience more danger days of heat. And what does this mean? Well, think about our economy, our seasonal residents that come down. Maybe those seasons will get a little shorter because nobody wants to be here in the summer and people will come down later in the winter. But more important than just the economy, it's bad for our health. When we have high heat index days, we find that we have 4% more mortality. In Southwest Florida specifically, in 2019, we had 177 ER visits due to high heat exposure. 37 people ended up hospitalized due to this. So by the end of the century, this will increase significantly, and it particularly impacts vulnerable populations, elderly, people who work outdoors, our gardeners, the people fixing our streets. So what can we do? We don't want these impacts to impact the prosperity and the quality of life in our communities. So I'm going to talk to you about 3 major climate drivers: transportation, the built environment, and changes in our food systems. So the reason I picked these 3 aspects to address today is, 1, they were the things we talked about when we started, the things we're doing differently. But more importantly, let's look at the kinds of emissions that Floridians create. About 45% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. And another 43% comes from electricity production. And buried in that number is the electricity we use to cool our homes with air conditioning, run our computers, our TVs, all the things we do. I finally selected food systems because even though they only represent 3.4% of the greenhouse gases in Florida, food is the kind of thing we can really control in our everyday purchases. So let's step back and look at energy and transportation. Every time you get in your car, you're making an energy choice. In fact, Americans create about 50,000 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalents every year, and 20%, 1/5 of that, comes from driving your car. So what can we do? Well, the next time you're thinking of purchasing a car, I urge you to explore electric alternatives, and if not, at least a hybrid. Here you see a picture of a Mustang that was introduced in 2019. It sold out, the electric version sold out in 1 month. If you're not ready to buy a car, at least seriously think about conserving fuel on every trip. What does that mean? Don't idle your car just because you want to run the air conditioning. Open the windows. And stop driving with golf clubs in your trunk because that impacts your fuel efficiency as well. I also urge you to walk and ride your bike when possible. There's no need to drive your car from one end of the supermarket to the other end of the shopping center, or maybe around the corner to play bridge. Walking is really healthy. Another thing that's become super popular are these electric bikes. In fact, over the past 5 years, there's been a 23% increase in people riding electric bikes, and that market's increasing by 32% in the next 5 to 10 years. But we also have to invest in public transportation. We have to invest in clean buses and rail and other forms of transit. We want to encourage EV charging so that people will want to drive electric cars, and bike share and ride share. These are things that our local governments have to invest in, and you have to tell them that you want that. But to make that really attractive, we have to change the built environment. In fact, look at this picture of a complete street. We call it complete because it addresses all types of transportation modalities. In this picture, you see that the sidewalks are wide for pedestrians, and they bulb out at the edges so that the crosswalks are shorter distance, allowing elderly people and disabled people to cross the street more comfortably. You'll see that there are green bike lanes that are marked, and these bike lanes are protected from the moving traffic by a row of trees and a row of parked cars. So when you look at the built environment, we want to create an environment that is conducive to all forms of transportation, not just motorized transportation. I'm going to show you a real example. Look at the picture on top. These two ladies are walking down the street and there is no shade. They're looking at popsicle signs advertising, and there are lots of street curb cuts, so cars are coming in and out of parking lots. Compare that experience to the one below, where people walk on a nice brick sidewalk, looking at windows of the stores, and they're protected from the moving traffic by a row of parked cars. We need to redesign our built environment. I've often said that transportation and land use are the flip sides of a coin. So let's look at the kinds of changes in the built environment that would be conducive to a resilient climate agenda. One, we have to re-envision the built form with more density. We have to incentivize solar, and we have to promote energy efficiency. In this picture, you see what we've done in the past, a car-designed world with large parking lots in front of the stores, parking lots that are asphalt and get really hot and have few trees. On the right is an environment designed for people, the density where apartments and offices and retail coexist. People can walk to a restaurant, they can walk down the street. There is more lively social interaction. I'm going to make it even clearer. Here's a picture of our ideal home in Southwest Florida, a single-family residence. The problem here is that the owners of this house are likely to drive 15,000 miles a year just to get to the grocery store or visit friends. Below is a slightly denser condominium development. Homeowners of mid-rise condos, they drive about 8,000 miles a year, half of that. We can redesign our built environment slightly more dense and really reduce emissions, and we have plenty of space to do it. Look at the picture to the right. This is an old shopping center, and what we see are big buildings sitting in a sea of parking. Imagine filling in all that parking with condominium developments, small parks, and activities. This would give us a lot of more dense, more vibrant built environment. And after this year, we're going to have opportunities to do that. We've seen major stores go out of business. What will happen to that big box? in the shopping center? What will happen to that empty office space as people don't commute to offices anymore? Imagine the picture on the right, a new retail facility. Couldn't we have put residential housing on top of that, or perhaps an office? We need to densify our built environment. We also really need to adopt solar. We're the sunshine state. So for many of us who were around at the dawn of solar, we think of it as expensive, but it's really not. The cost of solar has dropped. Right now, you can recoup the cost of a solar array in around 6 to 7 years and receive nearly free electricity ever after. And if you don't have a home or you live in a condominium or an apartment, you can also join Florida's Solar Together program. That's a shared off-site solar subscription service that is offered by FP&L. But we also have to change the way we incentivize solar, because right now, most solar becomes affordable through a federal tax abatement, which is slowly decreasing. The problem with that is that about 42% of the rooftops that could take solar are on low and moderate income housing that's owned by organizations that are nonprofits. And those nonprofits can't take advantage of the tax abatement. Likewise, in the picture below is a school. Local governments can't take advantage of a tax abatement. So as we think of solar, we have to think of new ways to incentivize it, programs that reduce the upfront cost instead of tax abatements. But you and I, we can do things every day. Many of us have already changed our lighting to LED, but have you adjusted your thermostat on your air conditioning or tuned it up to make sure it's running really efficiently? We can also turn on that ceiling fan. It's not there for decoration. Ceiling fans can reduce the temperature of a room, the feel, by about 3 to 4 degrees, and they use 1/3 of the electricity that air conditioning does. Also, as we do those home improvement projects that we've been doing, let's think about putting in proper insulation in your attic or adding weather stripping to those old windows. We really need to be energy efficient. And one of the ones that I have been talking about a lot is including shade, putting up shades over our windows to reduce the heat load. Shade shouldn't just be an ancillary project you do on your patio. It should be integrated into your home as an energy efficiency factor. If we all work together, we can do really creative ideas. Look at this picture. In New York City, they tried an experiment. They painted the rooftops of 7 million square feet of roofs white. Why? Because white reflects more heat, and they wanted to reduce something called urban heat island effect. When they did that, they found that that neighborhood felt about 5 to 7 degrees cooler. Those air conditioners worked less. This idea is so popular that now they're experimenting in Los Angeles. They're painting gray streets white, and they have found that in those neighborhoods, the ambient temperature felt 10 degrees cooler. That is good energy efficiency. To do these kind of creative projects, we really need to work with local governments, and our local governments need to work together. So here in Southwest Florida, we're trying to initiate the Southwest Florida Regional Resilience Compact. This would be collaboration among our multiple cities and our counties to innovate and create new policies that adapt to climate change. I urge you all to learn about that and support that as it comes to your community. Finally, I want to touch on food systems. Food and agriculture produce about 9% of the greenhouse gases in the United States, but 4% of that is just livestock. So many times you hear, why shouldn't you eat so much beef? And I want to try to explain that to you. While we can do a lot to reform our agricultural processes, reducing beef will be very impactful. Cattle are the #1 source of greenhouse gases in the agricultural sector. Each cow produces 220 pounds of methane each year, and methane is 28 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Also, cows are an inefficient form of creating beef protein. For every pound of beef, you need 25 pounds of feed to create that pound of meat. Compare that to chicken, which only requires 4.5 pounds of feed. And cows need a lot of space to graze and water. So that encourages deforestation in areas to accommodate more cows and more grazing. So by reducing beef consumption, you can really help tweak that greenhouse gas emissions. We recommend, and everyone's recommending, eating a plant slant diet. Eating more plants, well, it improves your health. It lowers your weight and reduces your risk of cardiovascular disease. Moreover, it supports local farmers. You can even grow it at home in that garden that you started at the beginning of COVID. And it's less expensive. If most of us could transition to a more plant slant diet, we could reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the ag sector by 70%. It's very impactful. But we also have to waste less food. About a third of the food in the United States does not make it from the farm to your fork. Imagine that. Each family wastes about $2,000 worth of food each year. Reducing the amount of food waste saves you money, but it also reduces methane emissions because when food goes to the landfill, it produces methane, and it conserves energy. So we encourage you to be more careful on what you buy, what you throw out. And if you are going to throw it out, try composting. Composting leftover food remains will reduce the amount of waste in the landfills by 30%. It also adds nutrients to the soil, so you don't need to use as much fertilizer to plant your garden. Moreover, good compost absorbs water. So when I told you that when it rains, it's going to rain hard, we need really good soils to absorb that water, and composting enriches the soil. And it also promotes higher crop yields. So when you think about this, I want you to think about your next steps. Every time that you go out and make a purchase, you're making a choice on energy, whether it's shopping or investing or water, or when you get in your car or choose to bike, your transportation choices. Think about the repairs on your home and buildings, and think about what you buy in the supermarket, your food choices. So I hope that you've learned something from this and that you find it exciting and interesting. If you do, talk to your friends and your family about how your choices impact climate change. Because the more they believe you to make changes, the more encouraged they're going to be to join you. If you're really excited, I ask that you publish a blog or even post your accomplishments on social media, because your friends who look at your pictures, they use you as a role model. So you can also be an effective communicator. And finally, some of these changes are going to have to come from local government. And for them to make those choices, they need to know that you want that. So communicate with your elected officials about making climate resilient public policy. And on that, I thank you. I hope you're inspired and you choose to make lifestyle choices that support a climate resilient future. Thank you so much.